Hello, everyone. I'm going to ask for my presentation to get going. So, good afternoon. My name is Misha Glenny. I'm a historian, a journalist, and I've taught at colleges around the world. But recently, I was appointed to the rather grand-sounding position of rector of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, which means that I hang out with a lot of clever people who make me look clever. Now, I'm probably best known for my study of the globalization of organized crime, McMafia, which was turned into a TV series by the BBC. So I've been following geopolitics since my early teens. And the challenges that we face today dwarf those of all other periods in my lifetime. Some call it the age of uncertainty. Some call it the great unraveling. So let me start by introducing you to the runners and riders of what I call, and here we go, the Armageddon Cup.
The Armageddon Stakes, featuring the favourites, the four horsemen of the modern apocalypse. And they're off. First out of the stalls, Pandemic, sired by the redoubtable pangolin dream out of habitat destruction. Pandemic is a reliable old nag whose rider enjoys the unique distinction of featuring in both the biblical and modern apocalypses. As we've seen this past 18 months, Pandemic can wreak havoc and destruction wherever he pitches up. Number 2, Climate Crisis, the horse marked on everyone's card. Been around for a long time, but only really came to people's attention thanks to David Attenborough. A win for this sleek thoroughbred guarantees the destruction not only of our species, but most others as well. Number 3 is a perennial lurker, weapons of mass destruction, who we haven't heard much from since he failed to turn up to the George W. Bush Mission Accomplished stakes at his last scheduled outing in Iraq in 2003. Undeterred, he still has the capability of blowing up the entire planet if he comes in first. And finally, coming up on the rails, today's dark horse that we want to take a closer look at, RoboNag. Yes, if our overdependency on unregulated computer systems is out in front at the winning line, then it's back to hunting and gathering for all of us. So, if you've spent the pandemic cultivating mushrooms, learning how to carve bows and arrows, or baking sourdough bread, you'll be in pole position when Armageddon comes.
So, over the past decade, geopolitical tensions have been on the rise everywhere, and that translates directly to an increase in threats. And the threats we're going to focus on today will be cyber, RoboNag. So, in order to explain this, I want to take you back to the year 2000. I don't know if you remember it. It was the year that the first virus, computer virus, went around the world in less than 48 hours. And it was called the I Love You virus. Now, because there are so many young people here, you probably won't remember it. So let me remind you, there you were working, you were already pissed off because it was a weekend and you were working. And then suddenly into your inbox drops an email and it says, it's called I Love You. And it's from somebody you know. And it's from somebody who you've always carried a little flame for. So you get very, very excited and you press on the link. And then you're doomed because your computer is infected and you spread the virus all over the world. Now, I was very fortunate when the I Love You virus first came out. Very fortunate indeed, because the first person I received it from was my ex-wife. And She harbored all sorts of emotions towards me at that time, but I can assure you, love was not amongst them. And so as soon as that email popped into my inbox, I saw it and I thought, something very fishy going on here. And it went straight into the recycle bin, and I saved myself a very nasty infection. So the year 2000 was a very, very important year for cybercrime because it included the development of the website which revolutionized crime on the internet. Let me introduce you to the wonderful world of Carter Planet. Now, what you're seeing here is extraordinary. It's over 20 years old. It was an advertisement that went around on the internet, very sophisticated at the time, and it attracted thousands of people to the website called Carter Planet. Carter, by the way, is somebody who deals with stolen credit and debit cards. And it was a sort of Facebook for criminals. You could do all sorts of things with it. Here's the homepage that you would land on. You could download the latest viruses. You could get tutorials on how to commit the latest cyber crimes. You could buy fake documents and IDs. And above all else, you could buy and sell the data of stolen credit and debit cards. Now, the reason why Carter Planet was so revolutionary is because it came up with the answer to the question that all criminals face on the internet, and that is, how can I do business with this person when I know he's a criminal, so it's axiomatic that he's untrustworthy? And so the family, the administrators of Carter Planet, came up with the escrow system for criminals. So if you had, say, the data of 5,000 stolen credit cards that you wanted to sell, you would send this to the escrow officer at Carter Planet. Meanwhile, the purchaser would send e-gold, that was an early sort of Bitcoin, to the escrow officer. He would then take about 10 credit cards and send them to friends at random around the world, in Rio, in Wellington, in Toronto. And if they worked on the ATM machines, they'd keep that as a fee, and the escrow officer would send the credit cards to the purchaser, and he would send the money to the vendor. This led to an explosion of cybercrime in the first decade of this century. It was the so-called Champagne era for cyber criminals. Now, I was really impressed by the people at Carter Planet. I went to see some of them, and I interviewed them and talked to them about their very interesting work. And the thing that really amazed me about them was that not only did they set up this website, but also, believe it or not, they organized what, to my knowledge, is still the only ever public conference for criminals. They invited 400 criminals from around the world, as far away as New Zealand and Brazil, to come to the first worldwide Carter's conference, which was held in Odessa in Ukraine at the end of May, beginning of June 2001. And I was very proud when I found on the deep web, which is not the same as the darknet, I found this on the deep web, the press release for the first worldwide Carter's conference. And I was extremely struck by the first item on the press release, which I want to show you. And it's in Russian, so I've translated it. Once again, the critical issue of the inadmissibility of any action in relation to the billing system, banks, or any other financial institution in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus was raised. Furthermore, the family, the administrators, will deal ruthlessly with any Carter found engaging in such activity. So I said to myself, what's going on here? You go to all the trouble of organizing the first ever conference for criminals in the world that is public, and then the first thing you do is to say you're not allowed to commit crimes in these territories. I mean, what is the point? So I asked a member of the administrators of Carter Planet, what was that about? And he said, you see, 3 days before the beginning of the first worldwide Carter's conference, we got a visit from the KGB in Moscow. And they said to us, look, we know what you're doing. We don't care how much money and credit cards you steal from Europe, from the United States, from the Middle East. But if you touch anything in Russia and the surrounding countries, then we will send you to a virtual Siberia before you can say Microsoft. And so we said, okay, we understand, we get it. So they didn't do that. But the FSB, the KGB officer, was not finished. He said, and another thing, if we require your services for the purposes of national security, then you will jump to it quickly. And this, as far as I understand, is the beginning where you saw the development of a relationship between organized crime and intelligence services.
The collaboration between the Russian state and organized crime first bore fruit in the year 2007. The focus of this operation was the small Baltic state of Estonia. That year, the government in the capital, Tallinn, announced it was moving a memorial to Red Army soldiers killed in the Second World War from the center of town. Estonians associate the Red Army with the suppression of their rights, but the Russian-speaking minority said moving the statue to a cemetery a couple of miles away was an intolerable insult. The Russian government acted angrily and warned Estonia that it would find ways to retaliate. Violent riots and looting broke out, fueled by fake news and disinformation from Moscow targeting Russian speakers. Then came the follow-up, a massive DDoS attack. It took out the banks, the government websites, the media. The power from millions of zombie computers were deployed. Estonia is the most wired country in Europe, so the government was faced with little choice. It shut down its external network links for 4 whole days.
People of Estonia felt that there is a real threat to the national security, to all the people. The tension was high, people wanted to get the news, very many are online, so they went for news services and suddenly they didn't have the access. Then they wanted to do their banking via internet and the banking servers were down. So there was quite an emotional reaction that there's something wrong, up to the point that the government is not in charge.
The attacks went on for more than 2 weeks, isolating the most connected European country.
Risk comes in all shapes and sizes, sometimes out of left field after you think you've covered all your bases. Mondelez is a global giant. Cadbury's, Oreo, Ritz Crackers and Toblerone to name but a few of their products. They have a very effective cybersecurity regime, and if that fails, the board was sensible enough to buy one of the most comprehensive insurance packages against cyber risk. They thought everything was watertight. Nothing surely could go wrong. But in 2017 they fell victim to the incredibly destructive NotPetya virus, losing over $100 million as a consequence. So they went to their insurer, Zurich, and said, "Okay, mate, cough up." But Zurich wouldn't. They claimed that the NotPetya attack was an act of war, and they based this on the assessment of the Anglophone intelligence agencies in Five Eyes, the most extensive digital spy network in the world. Five Eyes said that NotPetya was backed by the Russian government. Zurich and Mondelez are still battling this out in the courts. Geopolitics and cybersecurity are now intimately entangled.
At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a dramatic upsurge in ransomware attacks. This has now become the most common and destructive form of cyber attack. It's not just random businesses that fall victim. Cities, hospitals, charities and universities across the world have been crippled by this highly effective criminal tool. But that was nothing compared to the event which shook the world of cybersecurity to its foundations in December 2020, the attack on SolarWinds. This is a company which acts as administrator and security provider for some 300,000 companies and institutions around the world, including the US Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, and Microsoft. The attack on SolarWinds was not launched by some random criminal group. This was almost certainly a Russian intelligence gathering operation, carefully planned and designed to extract not money but data, pure espionage. But what it highlighted was the issue of scale. Digital transformation, the outsourcing of cyber infrastructure to the cloud, means that if you breach the network of SolarWinds, you've hit the jackpot. Instead of the secrets of one company, you have access to 300,000.
It's Friday, and it is, of course, the Muslim prayer day. Everyone's off, except for the skeleton staff at the Bangladeshi bank, including Zubair bin Huda, who is the duty manager.
He's part of the elite team of employees who run the SWIFT banking system, which is a highly secure banking system that sends money around the world.
Now, bin Huda goes, as he does every day, to the SWIFT printer to check up on the transactions from the day before.
There are usually printouts of transactions that come in overnight.
The SWIFT software would print out a ledger every single day, an audit trace of every single transaction that occurred on paper.
But when they came in on February 5th morning, as they usually do, they found there were no SWIFT messages at all.
In fact, the printer's shut down. It won't work. They try and turn it on. Nothing will kick it back into life.
He assumes it was simply a technical error, shrugs, goes home for the night, comes back in on Saturday morning to check the system again.
The next day, they somehow manually get the printer to work.
This deputy head manager, he walks in the room, the printer starts working, and these weird messages come out.
The printer starts spewing out all of these transactions, including individual requests to the Fed in New York for $1 billion. At that moment, it's panic stations.
Now, in the end, the criminals didn't manage to steal $1 billion, but they did get away with $81 million, which is a pretty good haul for a year's criminal activity. And what's good enough for Bangladesh is good enough for everyone else. Here's a bank which is concerned to educate its clients.
Son miles las personas que este último tiempo han sido víctimas del phishing. Pero ¿realmente qué es el phishing? ¿Sabemos identificar este tipo de fraudes? Aquí comienzan las caras del fraude. ¿Sabes lo que es el término phishing?
No.
No, la verdad no tengo idea.
¿Ha recibido alguna vez un mail de parte de su banco con algún tipo de link sospechoso?
Tengo un banco, pero me llegan mail de todos los bancos diciéndome que mi cuenta tiene un problema.
¿Y cuáles son las medidas de seguridad que tú tomas?
Intento ingresar siempre en las páginas oficiales. Intento que no me redirijan a ningún lado.
El phishing es aquella técnica mediante la cual el ciberdelincuente envía un correo electrónico a su víctima con un link, ¿cierto?, que hace referencia a una supuesta entidad bancaria. La persona estafada ingresa sus claves de acceso en el sitio falso, las que son capturadas por el criminal.
Now, the Banco del Chile certainly knew what it was talking about, as it had lost $10 million in 2018 to a cyber attack, almost certainly as a result from phishing. And then 6 months ago, Grupo GTD held a seminar asking the question, ransomware, ¿están realmente preparadas las organizaciones? Well, one organization which was not realmente preparada was Grupo GTD, as they were subject to a significant ransomware attack just 2 weeks ago. Now, but what if the activity goes beyond just stealing money? Remember how I talked about the fact that criminals and intelligence agencies were collaborating? Excuse me. Well, have a look at this. Earlier this week, it's an attractive photograph, I know, I had the privilege of visiting the extraordinary antennae network near San Pedro de Atacama, Alma. 26 countries have invested billions of dollars in this most powerful telescope in the world that combines the power of 66 individual dishes. Each of the telescopes is fitted with complex computers whose data is processed by this vast computer brain, the collator. This network receives an astonishing 7 terabytes of data every second, and it is linked to complex computer networks in the US, Europe, and Japan. On October the 29th last year, the system here in Chile was infected by a ransomware group known as Hive, whose criminal activities earned them around $100 million between 2021 and 23. The attack forced Alma to close its network for 47 days. Now, no critical scientific data was lost, but Alma, which is constantly struggling for funding, lost a huge amount of money as a consequence. And one of the conclusions of the investigation into this is, like so many enterprises, Alma had chronically underinvested in its cyber security. Now, there is some evidence that this was purely a criminal attack, but there's also some suspicion, which the Chilean police expressed, that a foreign power may have been attempting either to access Alma's highly sensitive data or simply put it out of action. This was an attack on critical national infrastructure. And this is when we saw the first example of a real attack on critical national infrastructure.
Це було несподіванкою, так як ці частини між собою енергетично не з'єднані. Це щось відбулося незвичайне. Коли ми подивилися на наші комп'ютери, то побачили, що курсори мишок самі рухаються, хаотично рухаються по різних підстанціях, і вони вимикають вимикачі, вимикають лінії, трансформатори. Що робити? Отримали підтвердження, що є зовнішнє втручання, і в телефонному режимі дали команди диспетчерам, щоб вони на місці направили бригади, звичайних електромонтерів на ті підстанції, щоб повторно увімкнути лінію. Того дня було Знеструмлено десь 200 тисяч населення нашої області.
So that was an intentional attack on Ukraine's electricity network. It was the first time that there had been a successful attack anywhere in the world on critical national infrastructure. That is now proliferating across the world. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's purely by chance. Sometimes a criminal group will catch a big fish at random. By mistake, it didn't intend to do it, but that can very quickly lead to geopolitical tension. At least I hope it will. Oh, look, we're under attack, I can tell. I'll have to go and check with the technical staff, who have fallen asleep, amazingly. It's not working. So can we go on to... Yeah. That one that's on... No. Sorted that out, unless we really are under attack. No, we're not, look. So there we are. You sometimes have a criminal...
Soon after SolarWinds, another Russian operation. This time a criminal group called the Dark Side took down the network of Colonial Pipeline in a ransomware attack. Now, Colonial distributes some 45% of America's East Coast oil, and so this counts not just as a criminal attack, but an assault on the country's critical national infrastructure, which, the US says, is more or less a declaration of war. In this instance, Darkside not only ceased the attack, they even returned the money Colonial Pipeline had paid them to unlock their data. My intelligence contacts in DC confirmed that Washington called Moscow and warned them to force Darkside to stop the attack.
I told President Putin that we need to have some basic rules of the road that we can all abide by.
In the wake of crippling ransomware attacks on U.S. businesses, Mr. Biden gave Putin a list of 16 critical infrastructure sectors, including energy and water systems, that need to be off limits to Russian hackers.
If in fact they violate these basic norms, we will respond. Cyber. He knows.
This was a presidential summit in July 2021 between President Biden and President Putin. And the only issue on the agenda was Russian cyber attacks on the United States. What is even more extraordinary is that it worked. Following the presidential summit in Geneva, the next 6 months saw a dramatic fall in the number of cyber attacks coming from Russian criminal groups. Moscow even started arresting some of them. And here we are. Sorry, that was just what I was telling you about, the presidential summit in Geneva. And then this happened.
It has happened. This is Ukraine's capital. What seemed unthinkable in the 21st century is now underway. A democratic country has been invaded by its nuclear-armed neighbor on multiple fronts.
Now, although it hasn't been reported much in the media, a furious cyber war involving the US, Canada, Britain, and Ukraine on one hand, and Russia on the other hand, has blown up since the invasion. Mikko Hipponen, the chief technical officer of the Finnish company WithSecure, one of Europe's most important cybersecurity companies, has been tracking the involvement of criminals in the fight between Russia and Ukraine.
And clearly, some of the gangs which aligned themselves with the Russian government in the beginning of the conflict, especially Conti, are being both protected and also highly likely that they are being given targeting information. Looking at some of the targets in Europe, energy distribution, energy generation, that kind of companies getting hit by ransomware really makes me suspect that this is not a coincidence, that these gangs want to make money, but while they're making money, they're also trying to support Mother Russia by hitting the targets, which helps Russia in this conflict. And of course, oil, gas, and coal are the key elements in all of this. So targeting energy generation and distribution in Europe, you get double whammy.
But it's not just the Russians. The US has the most powerful offensive cyber capability, perfectly able and willing to use it. The Chinese, the British, the Iranians, and Israelis are no slouches. Nor are the Brazilians, the Colombians, and the Chileans. You meet all sorts on the darknet: criminals, white hat hackers, black hat, three bags full hat, spies, terrorists, money launderers, the military, banks, and the mere digitally curious. They're all battling it out, spotting or buying zero-day vulnerabilities, laying down sleeper viruses, herding bots, you name it. It's a 7-dimensional game of chess where you have only the vaguest idea who your enemy is and what the hell they might actually be up to. New dimensions are being added the whole time: artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computing. We're reaching a scale that humans can no longer comprehend. Now, believe it or not, I am not a technophobe. I've been using computer technologies since 1985, and I love them all. But we are facing social change triggered by technological innovation at a rate never before witnessed in human history. Just at a time when some of the most destructive and irresponsible political leaders, Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, and others, are wielding immense political power. It is critical that we maintain rational human control over computers and now, above all, over artificial intelligence as well. And I want to address the central political issue facing us over the next 15 to 20 years, and that is competition between the United States and China. Because at the heart of this competition is a fight over technology and over who is going to control the future. This affects the issue of microchips. The West has a monopoly on the production of advanced microprocessing chips, but 80% of that production takes place in Taiwan, which is an additional explanation as to why China is so keen to reintegrate Taiwan into its republic. That's why you're now seeing a scramble all over the world for critical raw materials. This is the battle for the future, and Chile, interestingly enough, will play a central role in this because it has so many lithium and copper resources. And already the United States and China are fighting with each other to try and gain access to that. Now, for those countries which produce critical raw materials like Chile, which are really important, this is a chance to flip over the model of colonialism, which has so damaged the global South over the past 400 to 500 years, and to ensure that those people who want that lithium and who want that copper pay proper rates for it. And to ensure, of course, that that money that comes into countries like Chile is then properly distributed amongst its own people. But this, not the Middle East, not even Ukraine and Russia, although it's important to mention that Ukraine is a mineral superpower and has many of the critical raw materials that we need for the green transition. And where do you suppose that most of those critical raw materials are located in Ukraine? That's right, in the Donbass in the east and in the south around Kherson, in the very places where Russia and Ukraine are battling it out now. This is not just a war about ideology, this is also a war about resources. And more than anything else, the race to dominate the markets of artificial intelligence and quantum computing is going to determine what happens to the world in the next 20 to 30 years. And what's interesting about this is that while you have this increasingly aggressive competition between China, the United States, and lagging behind now, as is habitual, the European Union, critical though this is, and competitive though this is, we are only going to be able to survive if China and the United States collaborate. Because our greatest threat, if we go back to the Armageddon scenario at the beginning, our greatest threat is climate change. And we can only tackle climate change if everyone around the world collaborates. That's why we're at a moment that is so dangerous, because while we have the obvious scientifically based need for collaboration between the major powers of this planet, it's at this moment that we see polarization, that we see the outbreak of war in various parts, and we do not see a coherent political future at the moment between the great powers. None of this would be happening to this degree without technology, without computers, which is why, and this is my final note, it is critical that we maintain rational human control over computers and above all over artificial intelligence. And this has to be a central concern for all countries around the world in the next 20 to 30 years. Otherwise, we're going to be in big, big trouble as a species. Thank you very much.